Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to The 3-Month Vacation. Did you know that in 1816, Europe had no summer? Winter started as it usually did, but spring never came. Instead, the weather stayed cold. While Europe waited for the warmth of the summer, they got snow. Autumn was cold again, and then that northern continent slipped into winter yet again. The reason for this unusual occurrence was the eruption of a volcano called Mount Tambora, which is located in Indonesia. Early in April of 1815, the volcano erupted with immense force. It sent particles of sulfur high up into the atmosphere. It's important to note that the Earth's wind stream, they flow from the tropics, where Indonesia is located, to the poles. This is why those particles of sulfur were transported towards the polar south and north. As the northern regions moved into spring, these particles hung around, blocking or scattering the light. A volcano that erupted in 1815, thousands of miles away, caused Europe to have no summer in 1816. Notice how you kept listening to the information above without a pause? Even if a week passed and you were asked, why didn't Europe have summer in 1816? You'd be able to give most of those details. You'd be likely to say, a volcano erupted in Indonesia. I think it erupted in April 1815. It threw up particles of sulfur high up into the atmosphere. Those particles were then transported to the poles. This blocked the light, and hence Europe had no spring, summer, or autumn. Just winter. Now let's step back and put in a few details that make life more difficult. We'll run through the same story, but we'll add a touch of information. Let's go. Did you know that in 1816 Europe had no summer? Winter started as it usually did, but spring never came. Instead, the weather stayed cold. While Europe waited for the warmth of the summer, they got snow. Autumn was cold again, and then the northern continent slipped into winter yet again. The reason for this unusual occurrence was the eruption of a volcano called Mount Tambora, which is located in Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest archipelago in the world. It consists of 5 major islands and about 30 smaller groups. Together, Indonesia comprises 17,508 islands. One of these islands, Sumbawa, is where Mount Tambora was situated. On the 10th of April 1815, the volcano erupted with immense force. It sent particles of sulfur high up into the atmosphere. Rather than a slow, steady broadening of the equatorial cloud, it expanded. This cloud expanded in fits and starts. And some of those pieces of the cloud were blown away from the equator, and they got caught up in the dominant stratospheric jet streams, which in May blow east to west from the northern hemisphere and west to east in the southern hemisphere. These clouds soon began to resemble streamers or filaments, with small portions regularly pushed out to the equator and into the middle latitudes in each hemisphere. Eventually, these filaments formed a single set of clouds that covered the Earth, and there they remained. Had the aerosol cloud ascended only into the lowest part of the atmosphere, the troposphere, where clouds form, rain would have soon cleansed the ash from the air. But in the more stable stratosphere, conditions prevented the formation of clouds into water droplets. These particles hung around, and as the northern regions moved into spring, they blocked and they scattered the light. A volcano that erupted in 1815, thousands of miles away, caused Europe to have no summer in 1816. If you looked at both of those paragraphs side by side, what would you remember? you'd remember the same facts. A volcano erupted in Indonesia. I think it erupted in April 1815. It threw up particles of sulfur high up into the atmosphere. These particles were then transported to the poles. It blocked the light. Europe had no spring, it had no summer, no autumn, just winter. Did you recall it was on the island of Sumbawa? What about the 10th of April? Did the particles of sulfur hang around in the troposphere, or was it the stratosphere? You probably didn't realize that Indonesia comprises of 17,508 islands, but was that relevant to the story? When we write a story, what we tend to do is put in a lot of detail. And we think that details are important, but you notice how much of the details confused us. The first time the story was simple, it got the point across. And the second time, we put in what we thought were details. And immediately, you're lost. As the listener, you don't exactly know what's happening because there's too much information. Let's take a second example, and this one will really confuse you, so just bear with me. A couple of days ago, I got this story in my inbox. It was a really interesting story, but here it goes. During World War I, Pepsi was in deep trouble. Sugar rationing meant that Pepsi did not have enough sugar to make their syrup. Now, Pepsi was already selling in 24 states in America and doing pretty brisk business, but the lack of sugar meant deep losses. After the war, sugar prices went up even higher from 3 cents to 28 cents. And unfortunately, when sugar prices were at their peak, Pepsi placed a huge order for it, more than they required for their soft drink. The bet on that sugar went wrong, it bled them to death, and by 1923, Pepsi had to file for bankruptcy. But before filing for bankruptcy, Caleb Bradham, who was the pharmacist who started Pepsi, asked if Coca-Cola wanted to take Pepsi over. His offer was rejected. So Pepsi's assets were finally sold to Craven Holding Corporation for $30,000 before Roy McGargle, a Wall Street broker, took it over from them for $35,000, which is equivalent to about $500,000 in 2022. McGargle never managed to turn Pepsi around, and when the Great Depression occurred in 1929, his struggles deepened. Coca-Cola was asked if they would like to buy Pepsi again, and again they rejected the offer. Pepsi went through its second bankruptcy. During this time, Charles Guth, the president of Loft, a candy manufacturing company that ran a network of 115 stores, asked Coca-Cola to give them a bulk discount to sell their soft drink. And I'm going to stop here. This actually goes on for a while. It talks about 31,000 gallons of syrup. It talks about Charles Guth. It talks about bulk discounts. It talks about the bankruptcy proceedings. And it goes on and on. When we started to analyze the story, there were just 5 bullets, but the number of details were World War I, Pepsi selling in 24 states of America, sugar was scarce, war comes in, prices go up 3 cents to 28 cents, and it goes on and on and on. There are all of these figures and Craven Holding Corp, and the price was $30,000. Then you have Roy McGargle, Wall Street broker, pays $35,000. And this is just 5 paragraphs. It goes on for 14 paragraphs. When this story spans just 5 paragraphs, the details overwhelm you from the first paragraph itself. By the third paragraph, you can't keep track of the story. And it's not a very complex story either. But do you remember any of the details? Or are the details even relevant? The problem with details is they look very cool on paper, but it's very tiring for the reader. But the problem that we have is, how do we know how much to edit? The answer depends on the goal of the story. Let's say we go back to that volcano and it erupted on the 10th of April 1815. In my version of the story, 10th of April is irrelevant. April 1815 is relevant, 10th of April irrelevant. But what if something happened on the 11th of April or a week later on the 17th of April? Now that specific date becomes relevant because it's important. It can't be left out. If my story was to talk about how a smaller explosion would have been a lot worse, then bringing in that troposphere and stratosphere, that would matter. It's not just a question of leaving out information. It also depends on where your story is going and how your facts relate to the story. The good news is that you can quickly test how an audience will react to your story. When I have a story that I'm excited about, I will tell it to anyone who's around. I might do that while I'm in the car with my wife Renuka, or I might have my nieces pop in after school and I'll tell them the story. They will often ask me a question if they're unclear about a fact, or they will seem confused if there are too many details. If I'm particularly unsure, I may ask them to repeat it to me. And it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with an adult or a 10-year-old, they're very good at stripping out stuff that's boring or difficult to remember. You have to pay attention to the bits that they keep, and it forms the core outline of the story. It's also a good practice to listen to other storytellers. Comedians tell stories in small, precise clips. So if you get onto YouTube, you might want to watch Live at the Apollo. It's a British program. The comedians get on stage in London. And after listening to a story, press pause and see how much of that story you can remember. You're likely to find that there are a few confusing facts, and yet you can recall almost all of the essential details. A combination of telling stories and listening to a lot of stories is what will allow you to become better at your storytelling. Knowing what facts to drop and which ones to keep, they're the key to writing great stories. And if you're still thinking about what should I do, well, just make bullet points. A, B, C, D, E, F. And within that, a short story should work. Within 6 to 7 points, you should be able to get your message across. And you'll find that your stories are much better and aren't cluttered with so much information, so many facts that simply fox the reader. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. What's the one thing that you can do today? The one thing that you can do today is to take your story and put it into several bullet points. So the last thing that we covered, that was crucial. Put it into 6 or 7 points, and if your story fits in that, then you'll start to strip out all of those unnecessary details, and your storytelling will get better. Listening to stories also helps. Yeah, I know that's the second point, but listening to stories and putting it into bullet points, same thing, different method. One is your story, one is their story, but that really makes your storytelling so much better. That brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. Storytelling doesn't always stand alone. It could if you're just a comedian or you're telling a story at a party, but usually that story fits into article writing. And that's what April is about. On April the 23rd, we have the article writing course. This is not the live course. This is the home study course. And to get on that course, you would have to go to psychotactics.com/AW, that's for article writing, goodies. So that's psychotactics.com, AW goodies. And what you get are goodies, but it also enables you to go on the waiting list for the course. Now you might think, well, there are enough copies, but we only sell 35 copies at a time. And so if you're not on the waiting list, you don't hear of these copies being sold and you don't get them. And people try, they wait 1 year and they wait a second year, and then they realize you have to be on the list. So go to psychotactics.com/AW goodies and judge for yourself. And the second thing that you'd probably want to do is you want to get your hands on a book called Chaos Planning. Now I know this is almost April, but a lot of us start off the year with good intentions and then we run into chaos. All of that planning, all of those books that are written for people who are organized. And then there are people like us who are always in some sort of chaos. What chaos planning does is it enables you to understand, how do I live in this world of chaos, my world of chaos, and still get plans falling in place like I think they should. It's never 100%. In fact, for most of us, it's better if it just stays to about 50%. We tend to overestimate everything. Chaos planning puts all of that in perspective and shows you how to go ahead in a world that's, well, chaotic. Go to psychotactics.com and look for books that are under $50, and that's where chaos planning is located. And that's pretty much it. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? We talked about storytelling, and we talked about how you need to reduce the number of things so that, you get more effective. Well, I had these bunch of keys, and there were keys from a previous house, keys from some drawer. They were about 8 or 9 keys. And every morning when I get to the office, it's 4 a.m. It's always dark. Always. And it's not like we have a trigger light in front of the office. So I get from the house to the office, which is about 30 steps away, and I'm always fumbling in the dark. I was doing a presentation one day, and I brought up the concept of the keys, and this client asked me the most obvious question of all, which is, why do you have so many keys? Which are the keys that you could drop? And, to my surprise, I found that if I just put the keys on the table, I needed just 3 of them. The rest of them I put in a drawer, just in case I needed it. That was 2 years ago. I don't know where those keys are anymore, and I have no need for them. And that's kind of the storytelling aspect as well, which is we try and put in all this information, and it's not needed. But one thing I know, that when I get to the door at 4 a.m. in the morning, there are just 3 keys. And I'm able to open the door without fumbling, especially in the rain, especially when it's cold. Because, you need to get through the door quickly. I'll say bye for now, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. You'll be in 5000 BC, won't you? Bye-bye.